Hello and welcome to the EcoCast by ActualTech Media. Today's topic, evaluating endpoint protection platforms. On this event, you'll hear from our expert presenters at Wind River, Sophos, and CrowdStrike. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're interested in endpoint protection solutions and increasing the security for your IT organization and your company's data, you're in the right place. We at ActualTech Media created the EcoCast and MegaCast series to help educate IT professionals such as yourselves about the latest and greatest in enterprise technology, to help you learn about a plethora of different solutions all in one place in a rapid-fire succession, help you to get all your questions answered and solve your IT challenges, and why not win some prizes too? So we'll have those coming up here in just a moment as well. But before we get started, just a few things that you should know about today's EcoCast. First off, questions. We encourage your questions there in the questions pane. We want this to be an educational event, and we want to help solve your IT challenges. We're all former IT professionals here at ActualTech Media, and we know how tough it can be out there in the world of enterprise IT. So we want to help you to solve your challenges, and security is an especially hot topic today. So this is a great place to help get those security questions, endpoint protection questions answered. We'll be doing dedicated Q&A sessions with each of today's expert presenters, and we have our best question prize, which I'll talk about here in just a moment, to help maybe encourage some questions that might be on your mind and you weren't quite sure if you should ask them. Well, best question prize might help to shake them loose, if you will. We also have a number of poll questions for you. I've got a few poll questions coming up. And then we'll have a poll question after each of today's 3 expert presentations where we want to hear your feedback. Then when it comes to social, I want to call your attention to a number of social icons here on the screen. On the bottom of the screen, you'll see a Twitter icon. If you click on that Twitter icon, you'll find that you can tweet directly from the console, and the hashtag for today's event will be automatically appended. I'll talk more about that hashtag here in just a moment, but I encourage you to socialize the event. I'll be monitoring Twitter throughout the presentation, and of course, we appreciate you sharing the goodness or the good things you've learned on the EcoCast today. We also have a number of social icons on the top right-hand side of your audience console there: YouTube, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Those will take you to the ActualTech Media respective pages where you can subscribe and learn about all of the different content we create on this topic and many other topics as well. And then there in the Handouts tab, we have 3 different resources I want to call your attention to. There is the CrowdStrike homepage on which will take you to the CrowdStrike Endpoint Protection Buyer's Guide. You want to make sure you check that out. From Wind River, there is a resource there. It's the 10 properties of secure embedded systems. And then from Sophos, there is the Extended Detection and Response XDR Beginner's Guide. You want to make sure you check out that resource as well. Now, I said that we have some prizes, and we do. We have 3 Amazon $500 gift cards to announce on the event today, one after each of our 3 presentations. You must be live in attendance to qualify for the prize drawings and also meet the ActualTech Media prize terms and conditions, which you can find there in the Handouts tab. We also have our best question prize for 3 more Amazon gift cards. These are $50 Amazon gift cards. And of course, you have to ask a question to be entered into that, and then also meet the ActualTech Media prize terms and conditions. Winners will, of course, have the option to make a donation to a selected charity. All prize winners must submit an IRS Form W-9 to ActualTech Media, and we will reach out to you via email after the event. Over the years, we have donated thousands of dollars to charity based on prize winners who opt to donate their prize value to charity. If you would like to do that, when you win a prize, we would love to help you. We've donated to the charities you see here on the screen, and we've also done that in partnership with the Gorilla Guide Book Club. You can download free educational IT books at gorilla.guide. You can click on the link right there on the screen, or if you go to the Handouts tab, there is a link to the Gorilla Guide Book Club. These are high-quality, fun, full-length ebooks, completely free. Make sure that you check those out. The hashtag for today over on Twitter is ATM EcoCast, and like I said, tweet with the icon on the bottom of the screen and it will be automatically appended. You can also follow ActualTech Media and me, your moderator, David M. Davis, as well. Subscribe to all the ActualTech Media social channels, YouTube, Facebook, and our 10 on Tech podcast, as well as our LinkedIn homepage. That's where we post all of our latest and greatest content, so make sure that you check that out. The link to that is in the top right-hand side there of your audience console. And then I want to call your attention to something new that we're doing for the first time on this event today. This is the page that you'll see at the end of the event. You'll be automatically redirected to this page where you can refer your industry friends or coworkers to our event series, and we'll send them an invitation to these events. You know, if you find this helpful, we appreciate you sharing the goodness of our ActualTech Media events with your IT friends, your IT coworkers, and we'll send them an invitation to register. We promise not to spam them. They'll only get an initial invitation and then a reminder email from us to join one of our many upcoming events. So you will be automatically redirected to that page at the end of the event. And then also you'll find a link to that in the handouts tab where it says refer a friend. So we appreciate you sharing what we do here, and hope that you enjoy these events, of course. Now, before we get started, I'm going to introduce you to our first presenter. I just want to talk for a moment here about endpoint protection, evaluating endpoint protection solutions. Like I said, this is a hot topic, and on this event, you'll be learning about the most innovative endpoint protection solutions that are available today. You'll find out how they can provide for you a bulletproof protection for your company's crown jewels, and really what makes them unique in the security landscape. That is the goal of this event. And, first off, I think it's important to remind you that each of your company's endpoints, whether they're desktops, laptops, mobile devices, they're all entryways into your company's corporate data. And that's kind of a scary thought, especially with everyone working from home for the most part these days. People working from coffee shops, and these mobile devices can be easily stolen. They can be easily, hijacked. They can easily, you can click on a phishing email and they can be infected with ransomware or some sort of other malicious software. So it's a scary thought, and it's something that us in IT have to deal with. We have to find the best endpoint protection available, because those endpoints are the many different open doors for our company. And today's workplace, like we said, isn't just the standard workplace anymore. You can't walk around and see everybody's desk. We have this really hybrid working scenario. We have bring your own devices, BYOD devices. More and more are being used, and it's our responsibility to secure these. And in researching this topic, I found some interesting statistics here when it comes to ransomware. According to Sophos, who you'll hear from later in the event today, 51% of organizations were hit by ransomware across 2019 and 2020, and the criminals successfully encrypted data in 73% of those attacks. Some scary statistics. And when it comes to endpoints specifically, according to a Ponemon Institute survey, 68% of organizations experienced one or more endpoint attacks that compromised data and or their IT infrastructure. So these endpoints are, in the majority of the cases, the source of the attack. And then when it comes to, whether these attacks were known ahead of time, also according to Ponemon, 80% of successful breaches were coming from new or unknown zero-day attacks. So another scary statistic, and just one more, because I don't want to blind you or overwhelm you here with so many different statistics, but the average cost of these attacks I would bet is not in the typical IT budget here. Also, according to the same Ponmont survey, the average cost of an attack was $8.4 million. And I know those costs range, greatly based on the type of company and the type of data and the size of the company. We've seen, these ransomware attacks, cost just all over the board, many millions of dollars. So when it comes to the challenges, when it comes to what to consider when looking for or evaluating endpoint protection platforms, some of the considerations, in my opinion, first off, are just to have your goals in mind. What is your goal with your endpoint protection platform? And I'm sure you'll have many different goals, but keep those in mind when evaluating a solution, because there's many different types of solutions, and there's various types of endpoint protection platforms available out there. There's antivirus, URL filtering, application control, network access. A lot of different options are available, and they work in many different ways. So, try to understand the architecture, exactly how does it work, and hopefully you'll have answers to all of these questions at the end of the event today. But if during the presentations you're thinking, wait, how does that work? Does it work like this or that? Please ask. We encourage your questions. And then I talked about, these zero-day attacks. How does the solution fight these new attacks? How does it keep up to date on these malicious attacks as they innovate and change? And then compare the management, alerting, and reporting, because that's what you're going to be using, on a daily basis. Of course, investigate the service and support and implementation of the product. Make sure that it's going to be a good fit for you. And then I encourage everyone, always test and compare. Seeing is believing. Try it out for yourself. See if it's going to work for you, and see what the experience was like. So we've got a great event here lined up for you, and I'm really excited to hear from these experts at Wind River, Sophos, and CrowdStrike. Now, before we do that, just a couple of quick poll questions for you. The first one, we'd like to know, how has your company been impacted by ransomware? Have you had a serious ransomware infection, minor? Maybe you haven't been infected, but it's just a matter of time, or you aren't really concerned about ransomware at all. That's just how confident you are in your company's security. You responded to this question right there in the slides window, and I will share the results of this with you, and you can kind of see how you stack up with your peers on the event today. All right. Thank you to everyone who responded there to that poll. Let me share the results. And it looks like 5% roughly have had a serious ransomware infection. 20% have had a minor ransomware infection. So that's 25% who have been impacted in some way there with an infection. 66% say they haven't been infected, thankfully, but they feel like it's just a matter of time. And 6% are so confident with their security, they just aren't concerned with ransomware at all. So thank you for sharing those responses with us. One more poll question here before I introduce you to our first presenter, and that is, what's your time frame for adding new endpoint protection solutions or updating your existing endpoint protection solutions in some way at your company? Last poll question, and then I'll be introducing you to our first presenter right after this. All right. Thanks so much for everyone who responded to that poll. We do appreciate your feedback. We've got more polls to come during the event, and of course, we appreciate any responses to those as well. And with that, it's now time to kick off the EcoCast with our first presenter. I'm excited now to bring in Mr. Aaron Oshman, Sales Engineering Manager at CrowdStrike. Aaron, are you there?
Yes, I'm on the call. Thank you.
Great to have you, Aaron. Take it away.
All right, perfect. I appreciate it very much. My name is Aaron Oshman, Sales Engineering Manager with CrowdStrike. I've been with CrowdStrike for 3.5 years now, so quite a long time. And I've been able to work with a lot of experts in the field, have some great experiences. I've been in the cyber business for quite a while too, have past experience with SentinelOne, Palo Alto Networks, and Trend Micro, just to name a few companies that I've been with over the years. So with that, I think I just got through the intro slide. So what we at CrowdStrike like to refer to is 3 simple words, and this is our motto, and that's that we stop breaches. And what does this actually mean by we stop breaches? First of all, we haven't had a single reportable breach since our conception back in 2013, whenever we launched at RSA. And we actually offer incident response, which is one of the first things that we offered as a service for companies who had experienced a breach. So the tool was designed initially for incident response. It's built for incident responders and their teams, for SOC analysts, and also just for endpoint AV management. So we do quite a bit. We offer a lot, all within one UI and with one console. And this is how we're able to effectively stop breaches. And this is our motto to date. Moving on to the next slide. CrowdStrike's built on a cloud-native platform. So what does that mean? All of our modules are cloud-based. We maintain everything into one user interface and one single lightweight agent. All of the options that we offer up, which I'll show in a slide here in a few minutes, we can do all those things within that one single UI and one agent that only weighs to this day 50 meg of RAM of footprint, less than 1% of a CPU, and about 50 meg of hard disk space. Very lightweight. And again, that's because this product was designed initially for incident response and has grown to the endpoint security tool that is enjoyed by many. The cloud-native platform, and by the way as well, is also part of what makes CrowdStrike so powerful. CrowdStrike doesn't just put VMs in the cloud. We actually had to develop our platform from the ground up to work in the cloud. So it's very fast, very effective store and forward method, which helps keeps everything lightweight and all the processing in the back end of the cloud. It also keeps us very, very scalable, so you can scale as large as you need. CrowdStrike is also comprised of world-class expertise. Something that's been very enjoyable for me working with CrowdStrike is to work with a lot of experts in the field and be able to learn a lot. From our world-class experts, we have managed threat hunting. Managed threat hunting, I just saw that ransomware is mentioned. This is a talk I gave on actually yesterday at an event called OptiveCon. Effectively, ransomware has such a large economy. It's really more effective to understand the threat intelligence behind it and leverage threat hunting to identify any signs of ransomware within the environment or any actor hands-on keeper activity in the environment before any executable activity actually takes place. So managed threat hunting is a very integral part of ensuring that your environment is safe. And CrowdStrike offers that as a managed service. Of course, do the threat hunting on your own using our EDR tool. Managed endpoint protection, of course, we offer next generation antivirus, plus a lot of other tools that follow along with the EDR set, vulnerability management, IT hygiene, and some other services as well. We also offer services that I mentioned too earlier, like the compromise assessment, mergers and acquisitions. We do a lot around incident response, offering retainers. Our teams were started by experts, and these, all of our teams, our services teams, are built off of 7+ years of experience in the field. So our threat hunters have a vast experience in threat hunting from working from 3-letter agencies, large corporations, other government services, and we absolutely ensure that not only are they always on 24/7, but they're always experts as well. This goes along with our other services as well as incident response and doing other compromise assessments as well. So for the CrowdStrike platform, again, we do quite a bit of things. We all do this all within one user interface and still amazingly one lightweight agent with the specs that I mentioned earlier. So on the first tier of this platform for endpoint security, we offer up EDR technologies. We're the leading EDR vendor in the field today. The next antivirus piece of it, of course, is machine learning, and also addressing a lot of behavioral aspects of behavioral AI that's built into the product. So for ransomware, for example, the next gen antivirus machine learning should identify any malicious executables from 0 day on, doesn't require any signatures at all. And then behaviorally, if ransomware is tricky enough to launch, we'll identify any ransomware behaviors such as trying to blow away the shadow copies, new brand new file system, trying to encrypt files, etc. We also offer up firewall management and also device control as well to round out our endpoint security piece. And then we also offer cloud security. So we offer cloud security hygiene, cloud security workload protection, and also cloud security posture management as well. We can work with orchestrated Kubernetes that's offered such as EKS and run from the cluster level to inject a sidecar container into each pod and run along all the other containers within those pods. We can also install on the host level for any local sort of containerization, and also supporting all major cloud platforms, which would be Google, Azure, and AWS. For our managed services piece, as I just mentioned, we offer managed threat hunting from experts in the field who are always on 24/7 by 365, always protecting your environment, hunting for hands-on keyboard activity. And then there's also a turnkey piece of it, which we call Complete, which our teams will actually manage the entire product for you and perform remediations based on playbooks that you develop with our team, and then, of course, provide reporting anytime anything is remediated. For that fourth tier, we also do security and IT operations, which is IT hygiene, being able to identify what's managed in your environment by CrowdStrike and when it's not, and things that cannot be managed. And from there, you have visibility into deploying agents to machines that need CrowdStrike running on them. That way, you're not having any gaps in coverage. We can also give you a full application inventory across multiple operating systems, Mac and Windows OS, and Linux, and giving you lots of visibility into what those applications are. We also offer a forensics tool as well, giving you a rear view mirror into a machine that had not had CrowdStrike on it previously. So using the forensics tool, you're able to find that if there's anything in the past that happened on this machine maliciously, if there's any artifacts left over, you can find those and eradicate those before you put the machine into service. Our threat intelligence is a top-tier world-class threat intelligence program. This, to me, is one of the more important aspects of the product. It provides a lot of proactive means of standing up against threat actors who may be targeting your organization. Knowing who's after you and what they want, how they do what they do, who they tend to attack, how they deliver, and how they monetize is hugely important in understanding how to stand up proactively against attack instead of being reactive with our endpoint security tools all the time. The more proactive that you can get, the less work has to be done by the endpoint security piece, and the better off your organization stands. We offer not only intelligence on threat actors, nation state, e-criminals, and activists, and otherwise. We also offer situational awareness if any brand reputation is being damaged because it's ended up on dark web forums, for example. Lots of great details that we offer through our threat intelligence. We also offer automated sandboxing. So when an unknown executable is quarantined by the machine learning, whether it be 0 day or on forward, sandbox, it'll be automatically sandboxed for dynamic analysis for further information about what it would have done in your environment if it would have detonated. Moving on to the sixth tier on here, we have identity protection. So as most host-based tools are host-based, we also want to give a lot of information and visibility into identities so that we're able to define whether or not a user account is doing something that it should normally do or something that it normally does not do. If it goes outside of its norm, you have options, lightweight options, in fact, such as multi-factor authentication. And you can also, of course, just block anything that shouldn't happen with certain accounts, such as service accounts should never be able to RDP into a system. So you can put those controls in as well. This conditional access greatly reduces the attack surface in your environment, and it does it from the user perspective. All right, now finally, we're going to round it out with log management with Humio, and we also offer up a lot of other technologies, including some of our own if you haven't tried it yet through our CrowdStrike store. And again, we do all this from one lightweight agent and in one management user interface. Now, to mention the CrowdStrike store as that last tier, it's an excellent place to go. It's right directly in your single UI. You can hop into that CrowdStrike store and check out any technologies that you would like to partner with. Integrations with CrowdStrike from other technologies, such as Exabeam, for example, or Dragos. Lots of good technologies, dozens of them within the CrowdStrike store that you can find. And again, if you're enjoying CrowdStrike's EPP technologies and EDR technologies, and you may want to try out vulnerability management, for example, you can easily one-click try it for free in the store. It'll be automatically provisioned within minutes in your UI. No salesperson calling you. You can try it out for free for 15 days directly from the store and see if it's something that you would like to invest in. All right, final slide here that I'm going to show is why CrowdStrike. Over the past few years, I've seen a lot of reasons on why CrowdStrike. Most find that to be able to deploy easily without impacting the environment is crucial to a lot of organizations. We've been known to deploy tens of thousands of agents just within a couple of days. Again, the product was designed for incident response. There is no reboot required. It's a very low impact sensor. Most users have no idea it's been installed on their system when it's been installed because it is so lightweight and so low impact that it's barely even noticeable. Another reason is that we also find a lot of why CrowdStrike is reducing complexity. There's a lot of agents in a lot of environments, a lot of disparate tools that don't really work well together or communicate together at all. It's hard. There's no pivoting from one tool to another. So reducing the complexity on how the products work and how they integrate and how they fit together is what we've done with CrowdStrike. You also gain embedded expertise. So, if you're using our services from our expert threat hunters, if you're using our complete, you will get a lot of expertise learned, also a lot of expertise gained day by day with our experts working with you in your environment. And also threat intelligence as well. The more that you'll utilize the threat intelligence of any program, CrowdStrike included, you'll gain a lot of information and understanding and knowledge about how threats emerge and how they continue within time as we move forward. And you get immediate value. Again, being able to deploy quickly with no disruptions is immediate value. You don't have to reboot a thing. Just deploy out CrowdStrike. You can do it within days, easily, quickly, for tens of thousands of sensors and move on. Now, with that, I think I would like to share my screen, if that's okay. And you can look at a little bit of an attack demo from CrowdStrike. All right, perfect.
I see it.
All right. Okay, excellent. That's what I want to know, if you can see the CrowdStrike dashboard. All right, perfect. So, CrowdStrike dashboard, this can be copied, modified, changed to give you the view that you like best whenever you're logging in. We also have the means of customizing other dashboards if there's any other dashboards that you want to create with literally dozens and dozens and dozens of different widgets to give you views, to report on, to be able to schedule an export of a PDF, for example. Many other reasons, of course, why you want to have your own scheduled dashboards, but you can get all the information that you need right within one view. Now, for this one demonstration, and again, to show quite the breadth of what CrowdStrike offers, I've been referring to this as the mega menu. This has everything that CrowdStrike offers turned on. So you can see there is quite a bit of things. I'm just going to focus on the detection really quickly today. We could have jumped to it from the dashboard, but I wanted to show how simple it is to actually filter through. So if you have, you're probably not likely that you have 2,000 detections. This is a demonstration environment, but even if you have 100, it's good to be able to filter out on things like, I only want to see what's critical based on MITRE tactic or technique. I just want to see what specific tactics of maybe execution or things that were credential access. Maybe I want to sort by the triggering file everything that was PowerShell. Or I want to be able to sort by things that were maybe group it by command line or by tactic or technique based on MITRE. But however you want to do that, you can get the view that you want to view. And with in this one view, I could drop down this one detection. We immediately see that there is multiple detections within this one detection stack. We also see there's attribution to a threat actor. This happens automatically within your UI. So if there's any indicators that happen within an attack that were attributed in our threat intelligence to a threat actor, we'll tell you about them immediately, and you can jump to view the threat actor's profile. Now from here, we see a few things that happen. We see that Outlook, Spawn Word, and ran PowerShell. There's three processes that may not belong together very well. So to get more details on it, we can look at the full detection details that gives you more of a 3D view versus that 2D view. Now, we can kind of leave a lot of the attack out of it because I ran quite a bit of things in here. But as you can see, it's pretty clear that PowerShell ran, and that when PowerShell ran, it injected a thread into Notepad to try to obfuscate what was actually running malicious commands. And then from here, we can see that there is a ping that was issued, and we can go through each one of these, but we don't really have time to do that, but I think maybe the idea is understood here. We can easily see that the domain that was pinged, that there's an associated IOC. There's quick jumps that shows us things like there's an intelligence indicator here. So this is what told us that there was Fancy Bear. It was the domain that was checked. We see the confidence of it, the malware family, the threat type. I can graph this in my environment to actually see a Maltego-ish view of what other systems may have checked this domain quickly within the EDR tool. I also get information on the actor itself. Again, this is another place you can jump to view the actor profile. If there's any reports associated with that indicator, you can view the intel report to see what else you might need to be aware of within this attack. It seems like within this detection, which was a detection only, nothing was prevented. If it was prevented, it would have been stopped up here on the first detection. But I allowed everything to happen just to give some breadth of how much CrowdStrike can actually detect on a stop. So any registry keys that are being set for persistence, scheduled tasks that are used to run malware over and over again. Perhaps there's user counts being added. If we look at the very top here, you can see that there was a net user added using a bad actor and a password. They're also added to the administrator, the local administrator group. Perhaps the VSS admin was being used to delete all shadow copies quietly, or any logs were destroyed. But just some information and examples of how much CrowdStrike is actually detecting on when it comes to your environment. Now, finally in here, of course, for malware blocking the detection here, a copy of Locky was ran in this environment, and it was unique. That's because I modified it, changed the hash of it so it became unknown. So globally, across all CrowdStrike instances, it's not known, and locally within my environment, it's also not known because it is unique. Well, CrowdStrike's machine learning next-gen antivirus stopped that immediately, even though it was a mutated sample. Effectively could be a zero-day attack. Now within that too, there was an automatic sandbox analysis that occurred. So as soon as this unknown executable was ran, it was pushed over to the sandbox for behavior analysis that gives you a threat score and a risk assessment. Then you can jump over, pivot immediately to the full sandbox report to see all the dynamic indicators of what happened in the sandbox environment. You can also download quickly and easily IOC packs from the sandbox. It uses our intelligence to identify the indicators that were ran in the sandbox, but also what else is like it, to give you other indicators that are very similar to this one, so you can begin to block those as well. Okay. I think at this point I'll stop sharing my screen and move back. That was the breadth of the demonstration that I wanted to share today. Wanted to stop right there. I think that was the 20-minute mark, and see if we have any questions.
Absolutely, yeah. Great presentation, Aaron. I really love the demo. Cool to see that in action. We do have some questions for you from the audience. And while we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there that simply says, what additional information would you like about CrowdStrike? And so there's a lot of great questions coming in here. The first one that caught my eye here, they're talking about, they have backup and data protection software, but do you feel that, or would endpoint protection really prevent, they say, all ransomware threats in the future? What's your take on that?
That's an interesting question. I would say that's a very difficult one to even define. And I would say the answer to that would be no. I don't think you can ever get 100% of anything. And I think we all know that our endpoint tools, right, can be very effective, but stopping all ransomware, I think that's something that we'll always be battling. They'll always change how the ransomware is being delivered, how it functions, how it runs. And so with that, it's very important, yes, to have machine learning that's not signature-based, right, to be able to identify unknown ransomware threats, like that unknown Locky sample I was showing. But it's also very important, and I'll go back to threat intelligence, to understand, how traditionally up to date and currently, how threat actors are leveraging ransomware. What part of the ecosystem do they play in? Some ransomware or e-criminals who deliver ransomware, they just broker access. Basically, they'll exploit systems and then sell that access to other actors who may want to deploy their own ransomware. So there's also a lot of different pieces to the puzzle, too, that makes it even more complex, other than just the ransomware itself and how they actually operate. So using threat intelligence and threat hunting, I think, is your key to approach that 100% mark much more closely.
Okay, very interesting. Very interesting. Thank you. Let's see, next question they're wanting to know is, what about what types of endpoints can CrowdStrike protect? They specifically mention, Mac, Linux, Windows, and thin client devices.
I would say yes to all the above. Thin client devices, of course, it should be a support operating system like POSIX 7 or Windows 10 variations of embedded operating systems as well as some Linux ones too. But yeah, we definitely support all major Windows, Mac, and Linux operating systems. We also support Android and iOS operating systems too.
Oh, okay, very cool. And then there's a few questions here about the bandwidth and the resource consumption based on the agent that's installed.
Yeah, so bandwidth, if we're talking about network bandwidth, it's about 2 to 3 meg per host per day, so very low on that. It actually used to be 5 to 7, and we compressed that data over the past year and have made it even lower for the network bandwidth. For the sensor itself, it takes up 50 meg of RAM, so very lightweight on that, less than 1% of CPU, and about 50 meg of disk space. So if you're deploying to a VDI environment, you can install agents to all of your VDI now and not have to go back to a host-based solution where you lose some memory security for in-memory-based attacks. Now you gain that back again and probably use less resources than you did with the virtual appliances on the agentless side of things. So very lightweight sensor. It was designed for incident response, lightweight on network and on the host.
Nice. And then there's a few kind of competitive questions here that I'll just kind of rephrase as, what do you think really makes CrowdStrike unique when it comes to endpoint protection solutions today?
Top of mind, first and foremost, two major things: threat intelligence, being integrated in, being a top-tier threat intelligence provider, and have it interwoven into every aspect of the product. Whether you're looking at an EDR detection, a malware detection, if you're looking at the vulnerability management section, all that can attribute back to a threat actor and give you, reporting and all the important information about that threat itself based on their intelligence. I think that's a very big bonus for CrowdStrike in helping teams really stop threats. And then the other part of it's identity protection. That's something that we're doing that's integrated into our console that no other endpoint security is doing, Next-Gen AV or EDR is doing today. To be able to provide that identity management is also a very big thing that we do differently and much better.
Very cool. All right. Well, Aaron, I'm afraid we're out of time here on our live Q&A. I sorted 34 questions for you electronically here into the folder, folks who have questions about the CrowdStrike solution. So maybe you can get back to a few of those. We do appreciate it. Thanks again so much for being on the event today.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate the time.
For more information on CrowdStrike, check out the handouts tab right there, and the link on the top is the Endpoint Protection Buyer's Guide Overview from CrowdStrike. You can check that out for additional information. All right, thank you everyone for all the excellent questions as well. We do appreciate that. I'll leave up the poll for anyone who hasn't yet answered while I announce our first Amazon $500 gift card winner. This is going out to Danielle Hall from Massachusetts. Congratulations, Danielle Hall from Massachusetts. Still 2 more gift cards to give out on the EcoCast today. And with that, it's now time for our next presenter on the EcoCast. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Michael Melberg, Vice President of Marketing for Cybersecurity and Anti-Tamper Group at Wind River. Michael, are you there?
I'm here. Thanks, David.
Yeah, thanks for being on. Take it away.
Hey, sounds good. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time, and I've got a lot to cover in just 20 minutes, and I know that's going to be helpful for you. So just a quick overview. I want to start with the threat landscape and then get into the meat of it, which is our 10 properties of secure embedded systems. These are fundamental properties of any secure embedded system that we think, if followed, and we've seen if followed, will really help you secure an embedded system as it goes out through development and into production. And then I'll wrap it up with an example at the end with our own Titanium security suite, just to show how each of these 10 properties can be put into action. But real quick, just first a little bit about me. As David said, my name is Mike Melberg. I'm with Wind River's Star Lab Technology Protection and Anti-Tamper Cybersecurity Group. Been with the company for a couple of years now, but I've been in this field of cybersecurity and technology protection for almost 20 years, just securing weapon systems against various threats and attacks that are out there. So I got my start in software security, moved pretty quickly after that into hardware and trusted computing base, and then some work in cryptography recently, and now here I am in just outside the DC area, protecting the same types of systems against a variety of different attacks. And there are quite a few attacks out there. I think many of you will recognize some of these as these are just the ones that have hit the news, but every day there are new attacks. You know, Drovorub may be one that wasn't as prevalent, but this is a command and control malware that, if it's allowed to be installed on a system, would give somebody complete access to the system itself, almost administrative level privileges to siphon off data and do different types of command and control on that endpoint device. It's a very nasty piece of malware that's not the type that you want to have installed on your system. Blindside, another attack, which was based on return object programming type of, return-oriented programming style of attack, giving you some level of command and control. And then, of course, I'm sure everybody's heard of SolarWinds, the Colonial Pipeline. Colonial Pipeline, in fact, affected me on the East Coast. We saw long lines at the gas station, and for the first time, I saw a couple of cars and people walking down the highway with cans of gasoline, presumably looking for gas to fill up their car. JBS meat supplier hack. These things are really just they're starting to affect more and more our way of life. And there's a big question as to what's next, right? It could be anything. And so obviously we have to take action. I'm sure that's why a lot of you are here, and it's certainly what drives us. The thing that all of these attacks have in common is that, the attackers are in the system. And if you think about how security of an embedded system works, it kind of makes sense, right? From a defender's standpoint, we defenders have to get everything right. We have to plug every bug. We have to plug every vulnerability. We have to protect against every exploit and attack tool that's out there. And if we get any one of those things wrong, well, then we're leaving an opening for the attacker to get in. And I can tell you from firsthand experience, just on sort of the professional attack side of things, or the hacking side of things, the attacker goes for the weakest point, and they only have to get one thing right. They only have to find that one bug. They only have to find that one vulnerability and perform their exploit in order to gain access. And so we spend a lot of time and money and resources trying to keep the bad guys out of the system. And that's not something that we should give up on. We should continue to try and keep the bad guys out and put perimeter defenses in place. But we also have to switch our mindset a little bit, we think, and assume that the attacker is already in the system. And what that does is it puts us in a position to protect the critical assets in our system, the data, the intellectual property, whatever it may be, programs, applications, users, private information. It puts us in a position to protect that if and when the attacker finally does break through. And if we can do that, if we can put multiple layers of an onion, so to speak, where they have to get through the perimeter defenses, and there's multiple layers there, and then finally when they do break through, they find that it's not game over, but even with root administrative access, they still have a struggle getting at the critical information and programs that are on the system. Well, then, we've done just about everything we can do. And so how do we do that? Well, this is the 10 properties of secure embedded systems, which I'll go into in a little more detail now. Starting with the very first one, which is we think probably the crux of so many embedded systems is data at rest protection. And this doesn't mean, obfuscating our data, hiding it in certain places. This really means standard, strong encryption, potentially NSA approved encryption or some other level of approved encryption, depending on what country you're using it in. Encrypting is really the way, if we can't protect these systems against attack, if the attacker is finally going to get in, or if they're going to have access, physical access to the device, we want to make sure that the data as it sits on disk is at the very least encrypted. And this way, if they manage to exfiltrate the data, if they manage to get access to it in some way, shape, or form, at least then they can't reverse engineer or do any sort of static or dynamic analysis and disassemble it and figure out, what the software is doing or what the data contains. At least then they're forced to start up the system and run it. And once we get them running the system, then we can provide, we can play some tricks on them by, detecting them in different ways, maybe, destroying keys and whatnot. Some of those which we'll mention in the remainder of these 10 properties here. With data at rest encryption in place on our critical applications and data, we can then use that to do a secure authenticated boot. If you look at a typical boot sequence, anybody who's designed an embedded system, it's a pretty complicated dance between the hardware and the software, but it's not indecipherable by any means from an attacker's perspective. The attacker is going to understand how the boot sequence works, and they're going to do what they can to inject malicious code into the secure boots, into a normal boot sequence. And so what we want to do is we want to secure it. And there's a variety of different technologies that exist for, depending on what the system is that you're running, secure boot technologies that leverage that encryption. They leverage hardware-backed, trusted cryptography keys to authenticate the software before it's up and running, to measure the environment to make sure that the system isn't on a lab bench somewhere. And then and only then, once they've determined that they're in a good state to run and that they can run software that they actually deployed and not some malicious payload, then they decrypt with the keys and boot the software package up, whether that's applications running on bare metal or maybe virtualization, which we'll talk about in a bit, or the operating system itself. So data at rest first, then secure authenticated boot. And once you have those in place, then you start to get into the runtime aspects of things, which brings us to our third property of secure embedded systems, which is attack surface reduction. This is actually a step, I would say, prior to, but it leads into the runtime of an embedded system. And this has to do with making the attack surface as small as possible. So I mentioned before, the attacker only has to get one thing right. We have to plug every vulnerability. We have to prevent every bug from getting into our system, which in reality is an impossible or near impossible task. Attack surface reduction acknowledges that, and it just says, let's not put out any software in our system that isn't necessary for the mission, which sounds pretty straightforward, but many times, we select enterprise level software for embedded systems just because it's the easy thing to do, right? We'll just take this Linux and its 29 million lines of kernel code, or maybe 100 million lines of code Linux distribution, slap it on an embedded system. We know that it's going to have every driver support that we'll ever need, all the functionality we'll ever need. And before we know it, we've got our system working and we haven't stripped it of all of those unnecessary functionalities. Well, an attacker is going to utilize those to his or her advantage to gain access to the system. And so at the very least, we want to remove those pieces that we're not going to use, or best case scenario, we start from the ground up with zero and we add only the packages that we need, so at the end of the day, we can run the mission that we need to on our systems, and we don't have any extra functionality that the attacker could use to get in. Number 4, hardware resource partitioning. This is getting at something we lovingly call the pivot, where an attacker will gain access to the system in some way, shape, or form, and then pivot to give themselves additional resources or additional functionality, or leverage another piece of hardware in a different way. Think about a boat, right? With bulkheads and a boat without bulkheads. If you have a boat without bulkheads, then one hole in the hull is going to sink the ship eventually. If it's a big enough hole, it's going to sink it pretty quick. With bulkheads, however, right, one hole maybe only fills one of those bulkheads up, or if it's big enough, maybe it gets 2, but the rest of the boat can still float. It's the same idea here with hardware resource partitioning. If we limit the hardware resources to only the software and the components that need to access it, and we don't just open it up widely to the embedded system overall, then we're in much better shape to prevent one hole from taking the entire system down, or prevent the attacker who gains access to the system from gaining access to other parts of the system, other components, or other pieces of software. Number 5, many systems, I would say most now, it seems like, are connected in some way, shape, or form. They're connected with users, they're connected with software and applications running both internally and externally. And all of that communication, the attacker is going to leverage to gain access. And so we have to default deny. We have to have this implicit distrust of any communication that's coming in to the system. We want to make sure that any communication that comes in is authenticated. We know who it's coming from. Preferably the line is encrypted in some way, shape, or form to protect that communication, so that even after it's authentic, we know that its integrity is intact. And doing that will prevent a lot of different attackers from gaining access, maybe performing man-in-the-middle attacks in order to gain access to communication that's happening over a long distance communication between multiple systems. And at the very least, it's protecting that data as it moves around both inside and outside the system from being attacked. So that's a really important part for any networked type systems, but even important within an embedded system that maybe is part of a bigger system of systems, in that the communication between these different devices, components, should be authenticated and preferably encrypted to protect the authenticity and integrity of the information that's flowing between them. When we talk about running applications and exercising or accessing data on a system, we want to use this privilege with this principle number 6, which is the principle of least privilege and mandatory access control. So we don't want to give, least privilege just means preventing an attacker or a user, for that matter, from gaining access to parts, software parts of the system, or data that's stored in the system. We want to prevent them from accessing it unless they're authorized to do so. In other words, don't just leave all of the software and data open. Don't just allow a process that's on the embedded device to access all of the data anywhere. We're really familiar with this from the concept of users, right? We often log in daily to our devices, and we access the data and the information that we are authorized to access, but other users, even users within our companies or other users certainly outside of our companies don't have access to our information. Mandatory access control, sort of steps that up a notch, and it provides access control mechanisms within an embedded system kernel, say Linux, for example. And a process that is not granted authorization to speak to another process or access certain data will not be able to do that, even if the user has root administrative level privileges on the device. And this is a really strong way to prevent a number of different zero-day attacks on a system, because even if the attacker does gain root access, which is often what they're trying to do, they can't gain access to those critical applications and data if mandatory access controls and least privileges are installed. Moving right along here, and on the home stretch, number 7 is data input validation. I think many of you have heard about buffer overflow attacks. These often happen when we make assumptions that the data that's coming into a system is of a certain quality or is of a certain length or is of a certain type, and we don't check it to make sure that it's following and conforming to standards that we assume or that we need to be there. So for example, if I have a password entry form and I as the attacker fill that password entry form with a random password and then follow it with a megabyte of malicious data, I might just overflow the buffer and get the device on the endpoint to execute all that malicious code. We want to check to make sure that the data that's coming into the device is data that we expect in the format that we expect, and if it isn't, we throw it out. It's that simple. Number 8, there's no magic bullet for security, but there are some switches that we can turn on and off to secure our builds and our operating system configurations. And you can look many of these up. One of them, I'll just give a few examples here. Address space layout randomization is one, which randomizes the memory. It's a switch that you can turn on to randomize the memory of the application space so that an attack that works on one system won't work on another. There's a no execute bit switch that you can flip, so to speak, which will prevent malicious code from executing in regions of memory that are marked as read-only and non-execute. These are great things to look up and turn on. If you go to our starlab.io website and go to the blog, you'll find that we wrote a blog post that contains many, many different switches that you can flip on the Linux kernel to get some OS security built in, how to flip those switches, and the trade-off that you'll meet. So these are good things to look up as you configure your system to make sure that it's configured securely from the get-go. Number 9, much like the hardware partitioning, software containerization and isolation. This is a really strong way of preventing folks from attackers from pivoting between different pieces of software. And there's a lot of different technologies you can use, virtualization being one of them, containers being another. There's quite a few technologies that you can leverage to isolate software and just put it in its own space to make sure that, again, any attacks that are leveraged on one application or one virtual space can't break over into other spaces and allow the attacker to gain more and more access to the system. And finally, integrity monitoring and auditing. So once you get the system out there in the wild, you want to be able to monitor its integrity and have a way to audit it, if not in real time, at least after the fact. Just checking the integrity to see, is the system under attack? And if it is under attack, to what extent? What pieces are broken? What pieces have been exploited? Anything you can do to sort of detect the attack and quantify the attack is a really powerful tool for you in leveraging some sort of response, whether that response is real time or after the fact. So those are the 10 properties, and just an example of the products that we use to put all of these 10 properties in play at the operating system level. We have a product called Titanium for Linux. It's an operating system hardening tool that can be applied to many different variations of Linux, whether it's Wind River Linux or any other distribution, to protect and harden that kernel. Titanium Secure Hypervisor is a tactical secure hypervisor that's really meant for embedded systems and for security applications, running virtual machines on very stringent embedded real-time systems and making sure that they're secure against attack, and then a secure boot tool and services. And by the time you put all three of these together, you'll see here that we've covered all of those highlighted properties that we just covered, all but one really, which is secure communication, which we just consider to be an IT best practice, although there are tools and technologies out there that can be leveraged and installed. So this is the way that we cover these 10 fundamental properties, and we find that when we do that, we get really good coverage on cybersecurity requirements, and we protect the system against many different types of attacks, whether those attacks are, over the network or in the hands, when an attacker actually has the device or the endpoint physically in their hands and they're messing with it for their own advantage. This slide here, just shows it's a little bit of an eye chart, but it's meant to be a takeaway where you can see each of these 10 design principles with a brief explanation of each. And because we had so little time here, I wanted to give you a takeaway of a few implementation examples that you can use to implement each of these 10 properties in practice. And I think we'll have in the handout section a brief, 2-page data sheet that you can read over. We actually provide training on these 10 properties where we spend an hour and a half going into, of course, much more detail on each one of these different tools and technologies that can be leveraged against each one in order to harden your system and protect it against a variety of different attacks. So with that, I really hope this was helpful. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them now, and then certainly there's my contact information there. You're welcome to email or call to gain more access to these resources or ask any questions you weren't able to ask here.
Great presentation, Michael. Really innovative stuff that you guys are doing at Wind River. We do have some questions for you. While we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll for everyone out there in the audience that just says, what additional information would you like? And I can tell the audience wants a lot of additional information because there's so many questions here. Let's see. First one that came in, they're asking, when you talk about secure communication, does that provide isolation from threats outside and inside? Or I guess it depends where the traffic is traversing, or you want to talk a little bit more about secure communication?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it depends with everything in security, it depends on how it's implemented and what security you leverage. If we just think about an encrypted tunnel, think about the communication between, say your banking app on a phone and the bank itself. We want to make sure that the attacker can't sit in the middle and take zeros off of the transactions in our bank account and put them in his or her own. So we can encrypt that communication and authenticate it to do a few things. We can the bank can make sure that I am who I say I am. I can make sure that the bank is my bank and, not an attacker sitting on the other side gaining access to all my banking information. And then anybody who sits in between, who's listening to the transaction, is really just going to get that encrypted line, just gobbledygook, right? They're not going to be able to understand what's going on, and they're certainly not going to be able to modify anything in any meaningful way, because once it's decrypted, it'll just turn into gibberish. And in fact, some cases you could detect that it was trying to be modified and maybe change channels in some way, shape, or form. So for an endpoint device that's maybe reaching outside of its own network, that's a really strong way. All of those same principles apply. But even internally, if you think about, say, a fighter jet that's got multiple systems, or an automobile that has multiple systems communicating within itself, especially in the case of an automobile, right, where an attacker could, have physical access to it. Putting encrypted and authenticated communication between the endpoint devices means that they're going to have to go into those. They won't be able to just sniff the traffic between it and change it on the fly and sort of direct the vehicle however they want. They're actually going to have to get into the components themselves, whether it's the processor that's running the software, or maybe the hardware, maybe there's some application-specific integrated circuits that are on the device, and modify those. So that's kind of what I mean by secure, authenticated, encrypted communication is both internal, within vehicles or within system of systems themselves, and then certainly outside when you communicate outside of the system.
Got it. Okay. And there's a couple questions about what level of encryption does Wind River support?
So all of the standard, there's a standard which used to be called Suite B by the NSA, and I now believe it's called CNSA. If you look that up, you'll see, AES, ECC, SHA, and a variety of different key sizes and modes and lengths. So we're familiar with all of those. We have engineers on staff that are even familiar with encryption communication protocols outside of those standards, things that have come about sort of in the modern embedded device age, Cha-Cha, Poly 1324, different encryption standards. So there's a lot of them out there, but we would support, all the standard key sizes and modes and that you would find if you were to look up NSA Suite B or CNSA.
Very cool. Next question, do you need any special hardware to set up secure boot?
You do, yeah. So yes, you would. One of the key aspects of secure boot is protecting that key, the encryption key, because the attacker, if they were to get that encryption key, then they could simply decrypt and authenticate the payload all by themselves, right? So you want to protect that to some extent. Many times you can use a trusted platform module or a TPM, which comes on a variety of chips. You could use a standalone hardware security module of sorts. Many of the FPGAs out there have key stores in them that keep protected keys for the purposes of secure boot and other purposes. So you got to protect that key in some way, and there's certainly hardware components that can do that the right way to varying levels of success.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then another question here they want to know is what kind of performance impact does this have for different security properties and tools? So basically the performance impact of using these when it comes to the applications.
Yeah, great question. So there's always going to be a trade-off, right? Security goes on the system. It's performing different types of monitoring and encryption and decryption, and that's going to impact performance in some way. I can speak from our own product perspective. We have, the secure boot. We have tactical secure hypervisor, and then the embedded OS hardening. And each one of those affects it slightly differently. It's very minimal in all of those cases, and we have performance charts, to show exactly what that is for a variety of different processors. In many cases, it's sort of a small percentage of 1%. It depends on what. With security, I hate to say it all the time, but it depends, right? So as you do a secure boot sequence, for example, the decryption load is going to, as you decrypt the payload, that's going to depend on how big the payload is and what encryption you're using. So you would typically use a fast encryption scheme using a symmetric key for that, like maybe AES to decrypt, which is very speedy. It's going to add a little bit of a performance impact, but can usually fit many times in even real-time performance systems. With virtualization, I think about virtualization back 10, 12, maybe more years ago, when tools like VMware started to come out, and there was a big impact on system performance. Now processors have virtualization instructions built in, and virtual machines can leverage the hardware in such a way that you see just absolutely minuscule performance impact, even in the case of adding security. And with the OS hardening technologies, that's leveraging many of the kernel features within Linux, and then it's adding, again, the encryption, and so that's going to depend a little bit on how big of a payload you're decrypting and encrypting in real time as the system runs. But again, typically it's a small fraction of 1%, and we have charts we could share with anybody who wants to see what sort of what our measures were on that front.
Excellent. All right. Well, Michael, I'm afraid we're out of time here in our live Q&A window, but there's a lot more electronic questions. Perhaps you can get back to those folks. Obviously, a lot of interest in the presentation here and what you guys are doing at Wind River. So thank you so much for being on the EcoCast today.
Yeah, great questions. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, David.
For more information on Wind River, check out the handout there in the Handouts tab, the 10 properties of secure embedded systems, and of course, check out their website for additional information. And so I'll leave up the poll question while I announce our next prize winner. This is for another Amazon $500 gift card going to Eric Lenhart from Texas. Congratulations, Eric Lenhart from Texas. Still one more gift card to give out on the EcoCast today. All right, thank you to everyone who responded there to the poll. It's now time for our next presenter. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Andrew Mundell, Enterprise Security Engineer at Sophos. Andrew, are you there?
I'm here. Hi, how are you doing?
Doing great, Andrew. Thanks for being on. Take it away.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Delete as appropriate for your time zone today. Really excited to share some of the content that we've got coming up with you. And let's get started by talking a little bit about some of the different approaches that you can take to stop breaches before they start. And whenever I'm thinking about the kind of activities that an attacker might be doing as they look to decide which organizations to attack and then choose their final impact, one of the ways I like to review that is by using this Lockheed Martin attack chain. This is a really good, I actually think of this as like the OSI model from networking, but from an attack. It's a really good conceptual way to get your thoughts around what the different activities that an attacker is doing. And over the course of about the next 20 minutes, what I thought I would do is go through some slides and go in detail into each of these sections. That sounds, no, we're not going to do that. Don't worry. I would not put you through that. What I would love to do instead is spend about half of my time showing you some of these steps and showing you some of the different ways that proactive prevention can help in these environments and in these situations. And we'll talk a little bit about some of the more recent cases that we've seen out there in the wild. And then in the second half, I want to pivot a little bit and talk about ways that a proactive human being can get ahead of these kind of events. We're absolutely not saying that automated prevention is 100%. It certainly isn't. It makes a very strong, solid foundation, but really the best way to get ahead of these things is to have human threat hunters looking for the activity of what very often, especially in some of these larger scale, more publicized attacks, are human attack operators. So that's what we're going to cover, and I'm going to go ahead and get my screen share going here. So I'm hoping that screen share is coming through, and now on the left-hand side you can see what is going to be a Windows target machine, and on the right-hand side is our attacker's Kali Linux machine.
Yeah, it looks good, Andrew.
Oh, perfect, thanks so much. So what we've done is stage up over on the right-hand side a listener. There's this utility called Metasploit. That's a command and control framework. And what that's going to do is it's going to let me get remote access to this machine on the left. But of course, before we do that, we need to start getting our payload into that machine. And we still see that the vast majority of attacks that start this way start by trying to get a human being to open an attachment. So we have an example here. This is a particularly interesting one because I'm sure there's a few of us out there thinking how much I would like to see a flight receipt in my email. Really keen to get back out on the road once it's safe to do so. So I'm going to go ahead and get this attachment open and think, yeah, actually I'm going to Houston soon, so this all sounds good. Let's just open up that email and check that they got my flight right. I actually live in New York, and I want to make sure I'm flying out of LaGuardia and haven't accidentally ended up having to go through Newark. So I'm going to follow its instructions. It says, oh, you need to enable some content to see this. Yeah, looks like the real Delta logo. So I'm going to hit enable editing and enable content. And actually what we see here is a duo of notifications. This one's super interesting. So thanks to Microsoft, they have an integration layer in the operating system called AMSI, or the Anti-Malware Scanning Interface. What that means is before there is any kind of scripting that might execute on a system, that script itself, what the commands are, can be passed to a threat protection engine. And that threat protection engine can assess and analyze what the contents of that script might do. And in our case, you can see that detection happened as an AMSI prefix, so we know where it came from. You even saw the little UI pop up for Word, and we can see Word's been terminated. So what this shows us is there's some scripting, some content in that document, which by the looks of it, exec it's trying to execute some commands, which makes sense. That's typical steps for the attacker. Let's make things a little bit easier for them. So I'm going to follow some terrible best practice. I'm going to turn some protection layers off here. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to turn off right here the AMSI protection, and I'm actually going to use another little utility that I have here. I want to turn off one of our other detections as well. This is nested under some other ones, so I want to jump in here and disable one of our particular exploit techniques to make this again yet a little bit easier for our attacker. So as soon as this comes back, there we go. Let's just repeat that process, and let's talk a little bit about what all is happening there. So we're going to jump back into our email. Word is closed, so we're going to reopen. I'm going to repeat that process from the end user by hitting enable editing and getting our enable content going. Now, what we've seen is actually a behavioral detection. Let me hover over that real quick and just see. The eagle-eyed among you will have spotted that there's a MITRE technique identified as part of this. So what's happened here is we've allowed a bit more code to actually execute. We've actually bypassed that initial AMSI detection and another detection. So now what we're seeing is, and we can see it in this MSHTA application. So we think there is some scripting inside of this document that is doing something with MSHTA. So MSHTA is an application which, if anyone remembers, it's the Microsoft, back in the day, they tried to come up with this thing called an HTML application. And that actually allows for some scripting content to execute on an on a machine. And in this case, our attacker is using that HTA application as a method of launching their shell code into memory. So that's what we've got staged up from the Kali side, is we're trying to deploy a shell code payload into memory. So I disabled the behavioral detection, and I'm going to go ahead and run through this process again. And this time, if we keep an eye on that right-hand side, we should see some activity in just a moment. But by disabling that behavioral detection, we are allowing now that MSHTA application to execute. But, and hopefully you all saw this, on the right-hand side, we saw this interpreter session number 1 get opened up. And then right about the same time, over on our target machine, we saw this detection for a dynamic shellcode. Now, the shellcode that we built that's part of that MSHTA application, that HTA was a 0-day. That was uniquely created every time the staging happens over on our Kali machine. And what we're detecting here is that shell code, that remote command and control remote connectivity being loaded into memory. So for one last time, we are just going to, actually let's get rid of my dot there. We are going to make one other change. And actually to do this, I'm going to use my, my little script up here on the desktop. Because actually we want to breach this machine. It wouldn't be much fun for us for the next few minutes if we didn't breach this machine. So let's go turn some more stuff off. Here we go. And this time I'm going to turn off that dynamic shellcode detection as well. And that's my option number 2 here. So while we're waiting for that to come through, I'm going to repeat that same process. But our expectation this time is that I am going to be successful in getting that remote connection into our machine. And of course, the majority of attacks that we're seeing right now are still ransomware attacks. The speed of the actual impact event, it does vary quite a lot. We're certainly seeing some very short dwell time, and dwell time is the phrase that we use for the amount of time between an attacker arriving on a system, arriving in a network, and being able to, and then finally carrying out their impact or file encryption. So let's get that opened up, and we'll actually show you what some of these attackers can do fairly quickly. So we're going to get both of those things enabled. Again, after a short wait, over on our right-hand side, we're going to see another interpreter session get created. And while we're waiting for that, I'm just going to tidy this up, and I'm going to open up the user's documents folder here. And we're going to take a look at the files inside of our user's documents folder. When I click the right link, there we go. So from an attack perspective, in a pretty predictable place, there's some interesting files here that we want to potentially impact as our attacker. Let's open one of these up. And while we're doing that, we'll check the other window as well to make sure that yeah, that looks like it's running okay. Let's take a look. So here we've got an interesting looking cybersecurity insurance document. I'm going to make a little change to that, and I'm actually just going to save that. And for some reason, our stager hasn't loaded up over on the Kali side. So let's go and give that a quick repeat. So I'm just going to jump in back to our email and get that opened up. And what we really want to show you here is how easy it is. Oh, there we go. Of course, classic timing. There's our session now. So if I jump into that and browse into sessions 2, what I can see is I'm connected here. That's the folder that I'm running in. And get UID will tell me the username. So this will show me who I'm currently logged in as. Let's go in and take a look at this user's documents folder, especially when I spell the name right. And if I do a quick ls here, you'll see that we're looking at the same content. We're looking at the same folder. Now, as the attacker, what I want to do is deploy my payload. And I'm going to do that by running this command called run encrypt. This is a custom thing that we've added in here. This is not built in. And what you should see in a moment on the left-hand side is we've slowed this down to make it a little bit more visible, is that the file, when I get that out of the way, there we go, we should see some files in this folder start encrypting, and that is going really slow today for some reason. So we'll give this just a second to see. It looks like it's working there, but let's just double check from our shortcut over here. In case anyone was wondering, yes, this is all happening live, and it does seem like the demo powers that be have decided to make this a little bit more complicated for us. So what we might do at this point is jump over and talk a little bit about some of the activities that have happened on this system so far. So we've seen Word, we've seen Outlook launch Word. We've then seen Word be blocked, and then once we allowed it through, Word opening up that MSHTA application. So as we start to think through what some of those activities that we might want to do as a threat hunter, that is a pretty interesting series of events. So yeah, unfortunately, this is deciding not to play with us today. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to switch over and let's take a look at one of our other screens here, because I do want to talk about what some of the things that a threat hunter might want to do here. So from our management platform, I'm going to move into our threat analysis center, and what we've got here is a feature called Live Discover. Live Discover gives me the ability to ask really any question of a device that's across my network. And I've got an example set of results here where we're using that MITRE attack framework. You saw us reference MITRE in one of the detection names for the MSHTA behavior. And now what I can do is run this query that says, I'm interested in anything that might show up as a defense evasion technique from the MITRE attack framework. And when I go ahead and run that, in just 30 seconds or so this query took to run, what I can see is a breakdown of some really in-depth information. So for instance, here's that MSHTA executing. Now, when MSHTA executes, it needs to be given the path, or in this case, a URL to where that HTA file is. So we can see there's a fake URL that is pointing to our launcher HTA payload. And we can see the MITRE techniques that this is drawing from. I can see if there's a sub-technique as well. So as a defender, I can really start to understand what might be going on. Now, next up, we can see some PowerShell obfuscation. That is always a concern for us as a defender, because the vast majority of legitimate software or legitimate scripting never needs to take advantage of this type of encoding. And we're highlighting that obfuscation is coming out from that command as well. Now, this is useful information for me, but what we're really getting with these results are single point in time events. And one of the things with the MITRE framework is it's great, as I mentioned, for that kind of OSI model. It's great to get an understanding of what might be going on. But just because something appears in MITRE attack as an individual technique doesn't necessarily mean that one thing is a bad thing. Perhaps we've got a legitimate business application that uses MSHTA, and I should investigate that and potentially add a suppression to my querying moving forward. So what I really want to understand from these individual point-in-time pieces of data is I really want to get to what did this flow look like on the endpoint, on the machine. So we've got another query here where we can call a process tree. And what this process tree does is it builds a representation of the chain of events that led to some of those actions that we observed. This is a slightly different example, but you can see here there's Windows Explorer being launched by the normal system processes. There's Outlook.exe being launched by Explorer, so the user clicking on Outlook. There's WinWord, just like we saw, and in fact this is using a similar technique. There's MSHTA launching. And then we can start to see some of the commands that have been executed. And if we scroll down, we'll see there's some other examples here of things that a hands-on keyboard attacker might do. This is a good example of them downloading 7-zip and then extracting 7-zip. We do see about a quarter of all incidents that finish with ransomware. Finish with encrypted files. Actually, a quarter of those attacks also include some data exfiltration. We're seeing that definitely become more popular. And so far, we're seeing what could be stage events for that. Here's the attackers downloading rclone. And I think one of these next commands, yeah, there we go. There are attackers zipping up all of the contents of our users' documents folder. So with understanding the events that are happening on systems, on the endpoints, before they potentially reach that final impact, that's really one of the best ways that human threat hunters can start to detect and stop those breaches while the attackers are still carrying out some of their early stage attack processes. If we scroll down a little bit, one of these lights up really big, and that is this one command here, where there's 10 different MITRE techniques. Now, this is something we definitely want to pay attention to. As I said, a small number of those MITRE attack technique mappings may not mean much, but when we see something like 10, that's definitely a concern. And we can see a few different things here. We can see some commands. Actually, just immediately we can see the attacker here attempting to run a Mimikatz application. Mimikatz, if anyone hasn't heard of it, is a PowerShell-based method for extracting plain text credentials out of LSASS. And LSASS is the process which, for the operating system to work, Windows, it needs to have those credentials stored in memory. So Mimikatz is a method for dumping out those credentials. And we can see, let me hover back over that. We can see there's Mimikatz doing its dumping, and here's some of the other techniques. We're seeing it was downloaded. And if we go and take a look at the command line, then what we can see is the exact command line that this attacker typed in and carried out. Now, at this point, I might think that this machine's potentially compromised. I have a few options. I can run a full system scan of the device if I want. That potentially could discover some as yet undetected things in memory, depending on some of the other settings. I could run more queries. I could dig more deeply into some of the other data. But what I might want to do is start a live response session. Live response is the Sophos product name for remote terminal. So you can remotely terminal into this machine, and you can start to do things like terminating processes. We know MSHTA is doing something. We should probably block that. We might want to look and investigate what that command and control IP address, that connection that's using netflix.com might be. And I'll just wrap this up by showing you a very quick visualization that we can also produce. This really helps us understand that process. So you saw how we had to disable a whole bunch of stuff, and certainly there's settings that are recommended. Disabling the use of macros in the Office documents at all is a fantastic way to start. Having as much protection turned on as is possible, and also providing your human threat hunters with access to that telemetry, typically with those MITRE mappings, so that they can make quick but educated decisions about which clusters of data is cause for concern. So that is a very quick 20-minute run through of some of the different ways that you can look at protecting against threats proactively, but also enabling your human threat hunters to find those threats before they develop into an incident or an impacting event.
Awesome presentation, awesome demo, really cool stuff. Thank you so much, Andrew. We do have some questions for you from the audience, and while we do that, I'm just going to bring up this poll question for everyone out there that says, what additional information would you like about the Sophos solution? My favorite part was that visualization there that you showed at the end. That was really cool to see how all these steps are connected. So thank you for the demo, Andrew. Good feedback as well from the audience. Lee said, this is good stuff. Lots of other good feedback here. One question that came in, they're asking is, what sort of architecture, like what's installed kind of behind the scenes to make this possible?
That's a great question. So the management platform, and I'll answer this one. I'll take my Sophos, my virtual Sophos baseball cap off right now and talk about kind of the industry at large. Vast majority of products that do this are in the EDR or XDR space. Those are typically software as a service management platforms. So the management UI that we were just taking a look at is all hosted in the cloud. And then there's a small agent application sensor, lots of different words for that, an app that you install on your devices. So super simple, get the application out there. When it comes to the software side of things, in fact, all of our protection and a lot of that data telemetry into the data lake is all enabled by default. So it's a very simple way to get up and running.
Excellent. Yeah, sounds super easy. Here's a question here. They're asking if there's a way to detect the beginning of encryption, like disk encryption activities or file encryption activities happening as if a ransomware attack had started.
Yeah, that's a great question. I wish the demo I wish we'd have been able to show that properly in the demo. But typically, there's really a couple different ways that the attackers will usually do that. One is their process, the thing that's doing the encrypting, will open a file. It will change the contents of that file. It will close it or save it to disk and then rename it. So that open, close, rename, typically with a different extension. The other is that they will read a file, write a new file out with the same file name plus the original extension plus a new extension, and then they'll delete the original file. So those are the kinds of behaviors that we can run queries against that data in the data lake to say, if there has not been proactive protection against the file encryption, go look for those types of activities to see if there are any instances of that happening that have themselves have not been detected by the platform or by the tool. Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you for explaining that. Another question they're asking is, do I need a SOC team to be reviewing the detection information you showed us? Like, what kind of people are required to run this? Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll be selfish and answer this one slightly more from a Sophos perspective. We strive in our product to make all of that telemetry very accessible. We ship a lot of built-in queries, and our default protection is very strong. We would argue the strongest in the industry. But the best way to catch a human attacker is to be a human hunter. So we do recommend that organizations need to have the resources to examine some of that telemetry on a regular basis. Sophos, as well as other vendors in this space, as well as lots of managed service providers and MSSPs, are able to provide those services in addition to the software platform. So if you're thinking, my organization needs this, but I don't have the ability to quickly launch a SOC team, hire the right SOC people. There are plenty of services out there that can take this telemetry and run those investigations and potentially even handle response actions on your behalf.
Oh, very nice. Yeah, that's good to know, because I could see where that could be a concern, just having the expertise. And so there's folks there to help you take that on and manage that for you. Excellent. And then another question here, what about operating system support, and specifically around, they do ask around with Macs and the updates to Big Sur?
Yeah, that's a really important question. Obviously, the demo we just took a look at was on Windows, and we could have repeated that on the Mac. The attack process would be a little bit different from the Sophos perspective. We've got the same levels of protection, equivalent certainly when it comes to ransomware, tuned to Mac OS. And Big Sur, Apple made some substantial changes to the underlying part of their operating system last year. My understanding is I think now every vendor in the industry certainly supports that, and I think everybody has native support for the new Apple hardware as well. So if you have Macs, they are sadly, and I'm a Mac fanboy here, they are sadly not immune. You certainly do need to consider proactive prevention as well as proactive threat hunting for them too. Okay,
good to know. And it looks like now we're running out of time here in our live Q&A, but before we go, I would ask you, what should folks do to get started with Sophos?
I think the best way to get started with Sophos is go and take a look, grab a trial. If you're not running Sophos already, you can get access to that cloud-based management platform for 30 days. I'll actually give you access to our entire product line. If you are using Sophos today, log into Sophos Central. Down in the bottom left, you'll see a free trial section where you can go and enable XDR trials or any of the other products in the Sophos portfolio that are managed up in Sophos Central.
Excellent. All right. Well, it's been really cool having you on. Thank you so much, Andrew, for the excellent presentation and the cool demo.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
For more information on Sophos, check out the Handouts tab as well. There is a resource there entitled Extended Detection and Response, a Beginner's Guide. You can download that and read it after the event. Of course, visit sophos.com for more information as well. And I'll leave up the poll question for anyone out there who has not yet responded. We do appreciate your response. And I'll announce now our final Amazon $500 gift card winner. This is going to Julie Gordon from Missouri. Congratulations, Julie Gordon from Missouri. We also have our best question prizes as well, 3 Amazon $50 gift cards. We will be contacting the prize winners after the event. And I just posted the prize winners from today in the questions pane. All right, well, thank you to everyone who responded there in the poll. Before you go, I do want to remind you that after the event, you'll be automatically redirected to our new Refer a Friend page. We encourage you to refer your IT friends or IT coworkers, and hopefully you learned a lot on this event, and I bet that they would too as well. So we appreciate that. If you are a potential sponsor of an upcoming EcoCast or MegaCast, reach out to us at connect@actualtechmedia.com if you'd like to chat about presenting on one of our events. And then we hope that you'll join us next Wednesday, August the 4th at 12 o'clock Eastern for another EcoCast on supporting, securing, and enhancing Microsoft-centric environments. We hope that you learned a lot on the EcoCast today. Thanks so much for joining us. Have a great day. Bye-bye.